All right. So, hello, everybody. My name is Rachel Ellis, and I am the graduate intern at the Violence Prevention, Victim Advocacy, and Support Center here on campus. So, we go by VPAS for short. If you've ever heard that term before, we are the VPAS Center. So, I'd like to welcome you today to a conversation about intersectionality.
And hi, my name's Aaron. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the graduate intern here at the SAGE Center. So that stands for Sexuality and Gender Equality. So we work to support our LGBT students on campus as well as their allies. But thanks for joining us for today.
Awesome. So before we start, we'd like to tell you a little bit about the work we do in our centers. So the VPAS Center works to educate students and faculty and staff about healthy and unhealthy relationships, intimate partner violence, sexual misconduct, bullying, affirmative consent, and bystander intervention. So we provide programs to students, both inside and outside of the classroom. So if you haven't seen me, I'm sure you've seen some of the staff from our office in your classroom, probably doing some presentations. A lot of you have probably taken Not Anymore, which was the online training that all students went through. As well as we also provide advocacy services for any survivors through our current university advocate. Her name is Catherine Christie. She's available 24/7 to students and can help survivors access resources both on and off campus. So her contact information is located on Southern's website, which is southernct.edu/VPAS or southernct.edu/SART.
And so here at the SAGE Center, like I said, we work to support our LGBT community as well as their allies. So we do a lot of things like social programming, educational programming, advocacy, and just creating inclusive spaces, both in person and online. So we have an in-person office here, but we also try to create that inclusive space through our social media. So some of the services that we have, both online and in person, we have a map of the all-gender restrooms that are located on campus. We have an office space for students to use to hang out or do homework, whatever it is that you need. We also have an open door closet. So if you are ever in need of clothes, toiletries, or other essential needs like that, or you want to donate anything like that, you can come in and grab that stuff for free, no questions asked. We also have an Ally in Progress training module. So any student group or staff group that wants to be trained in how to create a more inclusive space for LGBT people, we do that training online now. So we're located in room 324 of the Student Center. So you can stop by anytime during the weekdays or reach out to us online.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about intersectionality, and this program is actually part of a campus-wide initiative called Thrive. So the Thrive initiative is aimed at helping students to develop skills and access resources that will help them be holistically well.
Yeah, so part of overall wellness is finding support in navigating those various identities that you have. So your social, emotional, and physical well-being can all be impacted by your social identities. So it's important to understand how those intersecting identities can affect someone. So we have seen so many examples of things like racial, gender, and sexuality-based violence and discrimination recently. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how the idea of intersectionality impacts those identities.
Absolutely. So just to give you a little bit of context of where intersectionality comes from, it was coined by a civil rights advocate, Kimberly Crenshaw. So she defines intersectionality as understanding how multiple forms of oppression can compound themselves to create obstacles that are not often understood through conventional approaches to social justice, equity, and equality work.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. There are a lot of identities that a person can hold that are marginalized identities. So some examples include being a woman, being a person of color, being a member of the LGBTQ plus community, being an immigrant, as well as many more areas that we can touch upon later. So when a person holds more than one of these identities at once, there are a set of unique obstacles that they may face in many areas of their life because of the multiple identities that they have.
Mm-hmm. So I think that the easiest way to look at this concept is to view a person holistically. So a person can have many identities that play out all at once, and it creates a unique set of challenges. So for example, if you have someone who is a member of the LGBTQ community, but they're also a person of color, that's two identities that exist independently, but when you put those things together, it creates a very unique set of circumstances that that person finds themselves in. So there's a video that I really liked that I think explains this concept very well. So I'm going to share my screen.
There we go.
What is intersectionality? Intersectionality is a way of understanding social relations by examining intersecting forms of discrimination. This means acknowledging that social systems are complicated and that many forms of oppression, like racism, sexism, and ageism, might be present and active at the same time in a person's life. Everyday approaches to building equality tend to focus on one type of discrimination, for instance, sexism, and then work to address only that specific concern. But while the career of a young, white, and able-bodied woman might improve with gender equality protections, an older, black, disabled lesbian may continue to be hampered by racism, ageism, ableism, and homophobia in the workplace. Intersectionality is about understanding and addressing all potential roadblocks to an individual or group's well-being. But it's not as simple as just adding up oppressions and addressing each one individually. Racism, sexism, and ableism exist on their own, but when combined, they compound and transform the experience of oppression. Intersectionality acknowledges that unique oppressions exist, but is also dedicated to understanding how they change in combination. The roots of intersectionality lie within the Black feminist movement, with legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw originating the term. Crenshaw felt that anti-racist and feminist movements were both overlooking the unique challenges faced by Black women. She stated that legislation about race is framed to protect Black men, and legislation about sexism is understood to protect white women. So simply combining racism and sexism together does not therefore protect Black women. Intersectional theory is now applied across a range of social divisions and also to understandings of domination, such as those associated with whiteness, masculinity, and heterosexuality. Intersectionality is not only about multiple identities, and it's not a simple answer to solving problems around equality and diversity. It is, however, an essential framework as we truly engage with issues around privilege and power and work to bring them into the open. Intersectionality means listening to others, examining our own privileges, and asking questions about who may be excluded or adversely affected by our work. As importantly, it means taking measurable action to invite, include, and centre the voices and work of marginalised individuals.
Awesome. So there was a lot in that video. I just love that video a lot. I think it does a great job of explaining intersectionality. And one of the concepts in that video and one of the examples they gave, I found very interesting was the one about Black women. So she talked about the fact that legislation and laws and policies that are created against racism are targeted towards Black men. And then when we talk about women's rights, a lot of the laws, the policies, and the struggle that we talk about for, like, say, suffrage is centered around white women. So that kind of puts Black women in this place where both of those marginalized identities that they hold, right, are not recognized, and then the work that is being done to support those communities that they're a part of excludes them. So I think that's a very good example of how intersectionality can play out. So there's many ways that it can affect those who hold those various identities, as I said. And in the work that Erin and I do in the VPAS and in the SAGE centers, this concept plays a huge role in the work that we do in terms of, educating students and also providing support and resources for students on this campus.
So yeah, like Rachel said, I really like in the video how they touched upon, someone with intersecting identities. You can't sort of take them individually and just add them together and kind of address the issues like that, but that they merge together and like we said earlier, they kind of form a unique set of circumstances for people. So like I said, queer people can be of any race, ethnicity, religion, gender, socioeconomic status, education level, etc. Meaning that many LGBT people face specific issues that are influenced by their other identities and communities. So some examples of that, Black trans women and trans women of color especially are among the most likely to be victims of harassment or violence compared to both the non-LGBT people and white LGBT people. This year alone so far, about 27 trans people of color have been murdered, and about 75% of anti-LGBT crimes that are anti-LGBT were against trans women or trans girls. So that's a very disproportionate rate that they're affected by violence, not only from others, but especially within or from police. They often face harassment and violence even from the police force. Another example of kind of how the intersecting identities affect LGBT people is when dealing with doctors or working in healthcare. So, women in general tend to not be believed by their doctors or professionals, or are not given the proper treatment that they are in need of. But especially Black women, brown women, and women or trans women, or a Black, brown, trans woman is not going to be believed by their doctors, or they're not going to receive the proper health care that they may need or the services that they're in need of. So these issues affecting the LGBT communities of color are important problems that still impact queer services and spaces today. So even within, centers, resources, and other services provided by people they cater only to white gay men, and they don't offer the proper space and representation for LGBT people of color. Even events that are as widespread as Pride Parades that happen every June were created for and are still geared towards cisgender white men.
Very true. You pointed out a lot of good points. So I would like to talk a little bit about how it plays out in the work I do in the VPAS Center. So how intersectionality affects survivors of sexual misconduct. So people who experience sexual misconduct or intimate partner violence can be anyone, right? So from any race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexuality, education, socioeconomic background, it could be anyone. But for the purpose of talking about intersectionality, I'd like to focus on the experience of women dealing with domestic violence, intimate partner violence, or sexual violence for a second. So African-American women or Black women experience intimate partner violence at a rate of 35% higher than that of white women, and about 2.5 times that of women of other races. So they often feel the need to protect the men in their community who already face stereotypes. So if a Black or brown woman is in a relationship that has domestic violence in it, or she is sexually assaulted by a Black man or a brown man in her own community, she may feel the need to protect that man because she understands that there are already stereotypes about them being dangerous or criminals. And that historically, Black and brown men are treated badly within the police system, and they're treated bad within the justice system. So they feel the need to protect them and to not, put them in a position where they're going to be entered into either one of those systems. So it's also known that Black women are much less likely to use things such as social services, battered women's programs, and go to hospitals because of domestic violence. And that kind of goes on to what Aaron touched on before, is that, Black women are often not believed when they go to doctors and when they go to shelters, or their experiences are minimized because there's a lot of these tropes about Black women having to be strong or them not experiencing pain in the same way that other races experience. So in addition, we can talk about the experience of Latina women. So one of the biggest obstacles that we see within Latina women seeking resources for intimate partner violence as well as sexual assault is that there's often a language barrier. So if there are not resources and services provided in their native language, that could be a huge barrier. And then we also have to talk about norms within Black and Brown communities, cultural norms about what is and is not accepted. So if we're not creating materials and we're not creating resources that kind of touch on those cultural norms, it's very hard for people to seek resources or even to know that something is wrong. And I also just want to reiterate what Erin stated about trans women of color and Black trans women. They are some people who experience the highest numbers of sexual assault and sexual violence, but they're often ostracized both by the Black community and also the LGBTQ community. So they often find no support and no resources within either of the communities that they belong to.
Yeah, and I know we've talked a lot about, the issues and disparities that a lot of intersecting communities face. And I think a common theme among many of them is that they often aren't given or provided proper support for the resources that they need, because they are ostracized from all the communities they are a part of. So, like we said earlier, Black trans women are often not as included in LGBT spaces, but they're not often also included in Black spaces. So they kind of have, nowhere to go for that support and resources. So touching upon all these problems and stuff, we also want to talk about a little bit of what we can do to try to minimize these issues and give support to those who need it. So there are a lot of things that us in the fields, as well as you as students, can do to improve these statistics and outcomes. So the first step is obviously bringing awareness to these issues, as we've been doing today. Getting the word out there, just that these issues are apparent and they still exist today, and making people more aware of them. Some other things that are really important to do, especially for people who may not have intersecting identities, is to listen to the voices of those, and raise up the voices of those that have those intersecting identities.
You're absolutely right, Erin. I think it's important for, people who do not have those intersecting identities or people who are allies to communities that are oppressed is to intervene, is to get involved. And as Erin said, to educate yourself and become aware that, just because might know one part of the community that you were supporting or you wish to know more about, you have to understand that there are people in that community who have compounding identities, and make sure that, when you're supporting that community, that you're supporting the entirety of that community. And I think we talk a lot in VPAS about bystander intervention and intervening in situations. And the third part of this series is going to really touch on what you can do when you see certain situations happening. But I think it's important that, whenever you may see these things, now that you're learning about this term, is to call them out. If you're seeing resources created that may leave out a certain group of people, bring that up. If you see, a situation play out where you think, hey, maybe this situation is not addressing the needs of the entire person, like call that out and try and be more aware of how we're phrasing things, how we're wording things, how we're engaging with the people around us. I also think that it's important to hear the stories and to listen to people, as Erin stated, who have these identities. Their experiences are so valuable and important and unique to them. And those of us who are in these fields and doing this work need to hear those stories. And I think students and people in general need to hear these stories, especially if that's not something you've heard before, or it's not a group of people who you have a lot of interaction with. It's important to seek out opportunities to listen to other people's experiences. So that's a great segue, right, into our second part. So next week, we are going to be showing you guys some interviews with current Southern students who carry intersecting identities, and they're going to be talking about what their experience has been, some things that they've learned and experienced, as well as ways that they believe their community here at Southern can support them. So we hope you tune in next week. And before we go, I just wanted to reiterate that if you or anyone you know has been victimized in sexual misconduct, or you know someone who has, or you just would like some more information, please feel free to go to southernct.edu/VPAS or southernct.edu/START for more information, as well as to connect with our current university advocate, Catherine Christie.
And yeah, so here at the SAGE Center, like I said before, we're open every weekday from 8:30 to 4:30. So feel free to reach out to us in person there, or you can reach us online. Our social media platforms on every platform is SCSU Sage. As well as you can email us or contact us through Owl Connect or the Southern website.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for listening today, and we hope to see you next week. Bye.
Thank you.